Well, welcome to Facebook Live with Lily and Christine. Hey!
Hello, hello.
I think we did it with minimal challenges this morning. First time
Getting
ever.
better. We're getting better. That's good. That's good.
I think we are. It's obvious that we're still amateurs, but we're getting better. So
It's all practice. It's all practice.
And I love your Christmas decor behind you there, Lily. So
Thank you. I'm slowly getting decorated for Christmas. I wait usually till December 1st because I like Advent. But I was out of town for Thanksgiving, so I didn't start until we got back, which was like on the 3rd. So I have, like, you can see this side of the room is decorated and the other side is not yet. We're working on that, and we don't have our tree up yet, but that's okay because I really do believe in the 12 days of Christmas and that you can keep celebrating until Epiphany on the 6th. So I usually don't take my tree down until the 6th of January.
We don't either. I love that 12 days of Christmas too. In fact, one of the things I love about it is the feeling that we have it to ourselves, because all the shops, it's like, Christmas Day, boom, everything's gone. And they're focused somewhere else. And what I love about that is that it gives us a chance to claim it very much for ourselves and to claim it for Christ in some way.
Yeah, there we go. Well, and that's something I didn't know, Christine, because I didn't grow up in a church that practiced or even talked about Epiphany, and I didn't grow up in a church that did the 12 days of Christmas, or even my great aunt. I remember my great aunt Dot. She talked about 12th night, but I didn't really know what that was, and I didn't, we didn't have Google back then, so I couldn't Google, like, what does that really mean? But she did. And then when I started working for the Episcopal Church, it was like, oh, they didn't, and we were a pretty really traditional church, so they didn't even decorate the sanctuary. I mean, they had greenery some, and then like purple ribbons for Advent, but then we didn't get poinsettias or any of the decor that I say is Christmas until Christmas Eve. So it was this big bright color on Christmas Eve. Whereas the church I grew up in, we had a hanging of the greens ceremony or service where we all processed in, like kids of different ages with different greenery to hang in the church, and we sang Christmas carols, and that was like probably the first Sunday of Advent. And we did do an Advent wreath in that community, but we didn't. I never got that we could keep it going, and that we could keep going. Didn't have to do all the celebration on one day, that we could keep it. So that I loved that as a person on a church staff, is like, oh, because then I could spend that time with my kids and I could actually rest into the holiday and into really receiving the birth of Jesus. I thought, so I love the church year for that reason.
Well, and I grew up, we always put our tree up on Christmas Eve, but I had no idea why. Because other people would have them up, though, of course, in those days, not that many more people kind of had them up at the beginning of Advent. But it was because my father was Greek Orthodox, and that was how he grew up, of course. And when I look back, I think, oh, this is why we put it up on Christmas Eve. But now we do. I love that ritual now, putting it up for Advent, but then keeping it up all the way through the 12 days of Christmas. And with luck, because we always get a live tree, with luck, it stays alive all the way through the 12 days of Christmas, if I remember to water it and to mist it and do all of those things that keep it alive. But
right, and it helps. It helps if you.
Oh, yeah,
okay,
sorry.
I was going to say, it helps when you live in the Northwest that you can get really fresh trees. I remember cutting them down. When we lived in the Seattle area, we used to go out and cut them down, and that was always the most fun, was to actually cut down a fresh Christmas tree, and you knew exactly how fresh it was because you did the chopping.
I've done that once, and it was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, it was. The other thing I've done in the last, probably 5 years, is I also decorate one of my jade plants. In fact, I put photos up on Facebook a couple of days ago and in Instagram, and I know people loved it. And it's been an important part of the ritual that kind of brings it to life in a way, because it's saying, oh, we don't have to do it the traditional way. You know, we can do it other ways as well, which I think for me is part of the importance of Advent, is helping us to think outside the boxes that we grew up with. You know, I mean, one of the things, the post on, you mentioned the post yesterday on God's Space about the broken angel, which is just a delightful post, and I think everybody should read it.
I do too. Yeah.
And it's been interesting to me because when we posted it on the God Space Light on this group, several people commented on the broken angels they have, and some of them have put them away, and now they're bringing them out, you know. And I think that's lovely, is recognizing that we have these emblems that don't have to be perfect. You know, they're beautiful as they are in their brokenness, just as we're beautiful in our brokenness. And so that's great. And then today's post is Radical Advent. And that one of the things that I've been thinking about by John Vandelaar in South Africa. So yesterday, Camino Island in the Northwest, today, South Africa, which is part, to me, of my delight in God's Space.
It is. It's a beautiful thing because we get the perspective from all over the world. And
it's wonderful. Well, and he talks about radicalness of Advent, and it's something I've been struggling a little bit this week. And I'm thinking, have I lost my radical edge? Is one of the things I've been thinking about. And, you know, Lily, you and I had talked about possibly focusing on, you know, kind of how do we wait in Advent? And part of what I'm thinking of, what is my radical edge? But I loved what he said. In fact, I wrote it down here. Advent is about waiting for a whole new reality, which takes hold of us by first taking our hearts and souls hostage to its justice and grace. And I thought, you know, the radicalness, the radical call of Advent is challenging us to seek for justice, you know, justice for people, justice for the planet, justice at so many levels. It's a radical story. And I was thinking about the radicalness of it this morning. And, you know, I think of all the characters in the story and how radically they responded. You know, I mean, heck, a peasant child, well, we think of her as child, but actually in that culture, she was regarded as an adult. The radicalness of that, the radicalness of Joseph's acceptance of her, you know, the radicalness of the shepherds, the despised of the community, you know, coming into the baby, the radicalness of the wise men, even though probably they didn't come immediately, the baby was born, but there's a radicalness of that and everything else, you know. I mean, that's just kind of the things I quickly wrote down this morning. And I thought, how in this season of Advent am I not just making room, but how am I inviting the excluded into my celebration of Advent and Christmas, you know? So that's something that I've been kind of grappling with today and the last couple of days when, you know, when we talked about how do we wait in Advent. And so it's kind of challenging me to think about these things. So
well, it's like that. It's not a passive, you know, there's passive waiting and there's active waiting. And we in Thin Place last night, we talked about Zechariah and Elizabeth and how Zechariah had to wait for 9 months to be able to speak. And then Elizabeth waited for 9 months to have this promise fulfilled in the birth of John. But it was like different kinds of what, you know, we talked about last night. How would it feel to not be able to talk for 9 months? And they did sign language. So we don't know whether he couldn't hear too. I mean, it doesn't say he's deaf, but you know, did they think he couldn't hear because he couldn't talk? I don't know. But that was, and I love that they put the women focused. you know, because last night we had some pushback of some people thought, oh, well, you know, Elizabeth said, no, his name is not going to be Zechariah. His name's going to be John. And then they had to ask Zechariah, is that really true? Is that true? They didn't believe her. But I was like,
well, they, you know, the others were part of the culture. So
right, exactly. But in the story, you know, in Luke, when we're in the Gospel of Luke for this new year of the church, that Luke is all about the women. Is that Mary gets the Annunciation, and Elizabeth gets to know, and that's just brilliant to me. And I'm going to post on Free Range Friday some of the art that I found on the birth of John, because in the lectionary this year we skip the birth and we go right to John being an adult announcing, you know, preparing the way for Jesus. But in Thin Place, we're like, okay, you can get that on Sunday if you go to a church that does lectionary. But we're gonna talk about, okay, John being born, and then the naming of John, and that was really radical to not be named after, you know, after you've been waiting forever for this child, and then you're not going to name him anybody who's you know, in your family tree. There's nobody in that family. And I think the other cool thing,
he was part of the radicalness.
Yeah, you know? Yeah.
Stepping outside the box, naming him something different, you know. And I read, I've got 3 books that I'm using for Advent this year, actually really 4, but the 2 that I'm particularly enjoying, I must say, I've got this one that, you know, because part of the radicalness is the call to, I think, to sustainability. You know, I think that for me is one of the huge challenges. That's part of the reason I love to see the Circle with the Earth Keepers podcast going up on the God Space Light community group, because they are inspiring, and I think inspire us to sustainability. But this book too, beautiful
Creation of Waste. That you're like the second or third person I've seen post about this book, and I don't have it yet, but it looks wonderful.
I got it last year, and for some reason it didn't ring my bells, but this year, boy, it is really ringing my bells. And the other one that I got, I've managed to find one copy here after somebody mentioned it, is called Lighted Windows. Now, you know, don't get it wrong, unfortunately there aren't any pictures in it, except for the kind of little things that the person who had it before me wrote.
Highlighted some windows for you.
Yes, highlighted some windows for me. And, you know, which kind of bugged me a little when I got it, because, you know, I didn't know that it was going to be like that, but it was still worth getting it because, again, inspiration, just beautiful. And one of the ones, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, Lily, is about Zechariah, and the kind of how he had, you know, I mean, he'd been doing these rituals for years and years and years, going to the temple, you know, and doing the prayers and doing all the expected things, to the point that maybe he had given up any real hope of anything changing, you know, of any radicalness happening at all. And certainly not expecting that he would be chosen as one of God's instruments of that radicalness coming into being. And so she talks about that, and it says, his faithful lifelong prayers for God's guidance are suddenly answered, and he doesn't know how to respond. And I love that, because I think it's true for all of us, you know, when God responds to things we've been asking for the last 50 or 60 or 70 years, or that our ancestors have been asking, or our culture's been asking, you know, we don't know how to respond. And I think, you know, there are a lot of situations in a way that we're facing at the moment that are like that. I think that the whole kind of environmental crisis in a way is like that. I mean, I remember when I remember the first Earth Day, you know, not as vividly as my husband Tom does, but I remember it, you know, and the challenge that it gave, and the responses that I've made, but certainly thinking, what other responses should I be making, you know, that I haven't known how to respond to. I think the justice issues that we've been challenged with this last year, the last couple of years, and many of us still aren't quite sure how to respond to them, or particularly we've made some responses, but we're not sure what the ongoing responses are. And I'm thinking, Lily, we need to point out your husband, and we need to get him kind of putting things up on the God-Based Light group, because he's called radical first timers.
Yeah.
What does he call his group?
He calls it racial beginners or racial first grade.
Yes.
So he's hosting classes specifically for white people to with no shame, no blame, but just to admit, hey, we don't know what we don't know, or we weren't taught. We weren't taught this in school, and we were missing. And what are our biases, and what are the things that we have ingrained in us that keep us from seeing the injustices in our world, and the things that we can be a part of to change the systems that are so broken. That's really big, that totally changed his life in the last year and a half. And so it's racial beginners, or on Instagram and in on YouTube, and in or racial first grade. I can put that in the chat. I can put that in later.
Yeah, put it in the chat, and put something up on the God-Based Light group as well.
Okay. All right.
Get him to start putting things onto the God-Based Light group.
He will. He would love that. That would be good.
No, I think that would be really good, because we need that kind of a challenge on an ongoing basis. I love, as I said, I love the Earth Keepers podcasts going up, and we need more of that in this group, I think, because that's we talk about sustainability, we talk about justice, but we don't see that very represented in the things that people put up. So I want to see more. I would like to see more of that.
That's great. Well, one of the things that Rob has people do is start looking at different voices, like in their Instagram feed and on Facebook. And one of the people that I've found, her name is Cole Author Riley, and she's Black liturgies on Instagram, and the Black liturgist on Facebook. And this week she had one she quoted Zora Neale Hurston, and she said, "They seem to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God." And she said, "In Advent, we wait for a God who refuses to let the darkness be colonized. If you find yourself thirsty for light in this season, remember, it's the shadows that will save you in the desert places."
Wow.
It's divine refuge. And then she does breath prayers. I love that she does breath prayers. And she says, "God, I'm scared. Exhale, keep watch as I wait. God, my soul is parched. Breathe in. God, my soul is parched. And exhale, let these shadows become a refuge."
Wow.
And that's really, I love that I thought about the desert. You have to be in shade. If you're out in the desert, you're looking for that oasis with the palm trees or whatever to sit under, so you don't get burned by the bright sunshine. And you talked about darkness and light on Monday, and the light of the aurora borealis, and that when I did long ago, I did a sacred space in Cincinnati. And one of the stations that one of my friends in the community created was you had to crawl into this space like a tent, but it was totally dark. And that in order to follow the star, to find Jesus, it had to be totally dark. And so he had put some glow in the dark stars on the ceiling in this space. So you crawled in kind of this tent and laid down in the dark and looked up and saw the lights, the glow in the dark stars. And it was like, sometimes we have to have the darkness to find the light.
We've kind of lived in a world, we've created a world where there isn't any darkness, or we don't think, we don't want any darkness,
Right.
And so it's, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, I was just thinking the same thing, is that we don't see the gift, I was thinking about Isaiah too, that those who've walked in darkness, the light has dawned. And that we need both to see to see. And one of the things that I miss about California, and Rob really misses about our time in California, where we lived up valley in Napa Valley, is the stars were so bright at night.
The stars.
Yeah, you can really see them. And because of the lack of humidity, you know, in places like where I live in Nashville, the humidity is so thick, even on a dark night, even if you were out away from town, it would be still not as clear as you get in a low humidity place like Upper Napa Valley and in the high desert, like Santa Fe area. So those of you who live in those kind of areas, take advantage of watching the stars during Advent and imagining what it would be like to follow the stars to get to the King. Because
it would have been totally dark. You know, I mean, we kind of forget that. In fact, I was thinking about Mary's and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem today. And you know, I mean, we see these Christmas cards with this lovely little image of Mary on a donkey and, you know, Joseph, and it looks so easy. And I think it must have been a hair-raising trip. Firstly, you know, now we don't know really how pregnant she was when they went, but she was pregnant enough to be pretty uncomfortable, I would say. Whether they could afford a donkey or not, it's interesting. I've looked on the internet and some people say yes, some say no. She might have had to walk in this uncomfortable state. Thirdly, you know, it probably wasn't just the two of them.
Right.
There were others, because it wouldn't have been safe for two people to travel 80 miles, which, you know, even at 3 miles an hour, say doing 5 to 6, you know, maybe even if they did 10 hours travel a day, which is pretty unlikely, that would still take them 3 days to get there, you know, so it probably took them a week to get there. And I suspect, yeah, that there were bandits and wild animals and things around the place. You know,
but it was probably crowded. I always thought, you know, I think we do have this Sunday school view of like everything's in isolation versus if everybody had to go to be, you know, to be taxed, then there was probably a caravan of lots of people going different places to go to pay their taxes. So
that was the safe way to travel, you know,
and it's crowded, you know, that we don't think about what is, especially in, you know, we live in cities, but we don't live in crowded cities. And so I was thinking about, you know, that there are crowds in a lot of places where people have to wander through crowds. So it's a messy, you know, it's a messiness of the story versus, oh, it's just this little, like you said, the Christmas card or the flannel. You know, I grew up with the flannel board in Sunday school where you put the you know, on the wall. And I love flannel boards. Felt, you know, that's probably my visual learner side of me that likes that, and the craft side of me that likes that. But it did give you a perspective that wasn't like ingrained in the culture of the.
It just, yeah, we've got these wrong ideas. And I was thinking, you know, what an anxious time it must have been, all the anxieties that she must have suffered from, that they must have suffered from. You know, you'd think if they were in a caravan, did the other people in the caravan accept her? You know, were they kind of a little bit on the edges even there because of, you know, the state she was in and the fact that, you know, I mean, you can't imagine, it's not something that would have been kept, well, you couldn't have kept it quiet. You know, everybody would have known, oh, she's the one that, you know.
Right. Well, and that was the thing I got about Zechariah last night too, that story of John being born, that wasn't in isolation either, that all of the family and all of the neighbors came for his circumcision. So they all showed up and they all get the miracle of that he hasn't, you know, someone said last night, so the angel said, you're not going to speak until the baby is born. So the baby's born, and 8 days later, you still haven't gotten to talk. So did you think you're never going to get to talk again, you know, kind of thing? Or I thought that was brilliant. It's like, oh, wow, he had to wait 8 longer days to before he got to talk, before Zechariah got to speak again. But they all got to hear the prophecy, and they all got to see, you know, then the whole town and the whole hill country got excited. So yeah, everybody, this was a verbal culture where everybody told the stories and it all got around. So yeah, she wasn't in isolation. And that was a radical, you're talking about radical thing, that Joseph didn't leave her. there, he took her with him to Bethlehem. He could have just said, you go stay with Elizabeth because she's okay, but you come, I'm going by myself. No, he took her too. So that was a radical action to take a pregnant person somewhere with you, and especially one that you weren't technically married to yet, in that culture. That's
there's so much radicalness there, and we've lost, we can so easily lose sight of it in the way that we lead up to Christmas. And I mean, heck, I've been putting up Christmas lights. We don't have many, but I love to put up what we've got. We've got a traditional tree. We've got traditional aspects to our Advent celebration. I've been making Christmas cookies all over the place. Yesterday in particular, the house was very fragrant with some new cookies that I was trying, chocolate ginger cookies. And Tom says I can definitely make them again. He's always my tester. And then I made my English fruitcake, which of course takes 3.5 hours to cook. So, there was the smell of baking all day, which was wonderful. So, we do a lot of the traditional things. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do those, but I think in the midst of that, we need to remember that this is a radical story. And somehow we need to prepare for the radicalness of the story as well. And so that's why I appreciate posts like the one that John Vanderlaar put up today. It's just great. Or the one that, Elaine's post yesterday, because in a way that's saying radically, the angel only had one wing. And that in itself is a radical thought too, that it wasn't perfect, that it was broken. And yet that's part of the story too, is the brokenness that all of us share. And we shouldn't be afraid of that, we should still recognize, and I think she said in her post, that there's beauty. It's beautiful, even though it's broken. And I think that we recognize that we're beautiful, even though we're broken. And even though, yeah.
I was just going to say that last night we're going toward the joy candle in the Advent wreath, but and some of the folks who are part of our community are very feeling that joy of the season, and then some people aren't. Some people are exhausted. They're in ministry and they're still trying to determine how to do church in the middle of the pandemic. Some of them are Canadian pastors who they have changed the rules again because of the new variant. And it's an exhausting season and somebody posted yesterday that, it's going to be 2022 in like 25 days or something. And, and I'm still back in 2019, and that was like 3 years ago. And I'm like, it's part, some people have been just doing the same things they've done for the last 2 years, even in the middle of everything. And some of us haven't. And it's so there's a season. I think we need to acknowledge that loss and that fatigue that we've all been feeling. And some people don't even realize how tired they really are because of the constant having to go, to weigh out, is it safe to go do this or not? Or do I mask or not? Or what can we do that we didn't do last year? So there's some of the openness is great, but then there's also the uncertainty is still there.
I know. I facilitated an Advent quiet day on Saturday, which actually was a wonderful experience when we started with making a corporate Advent wreath, that Lily obviously was inspired by your post a couple of weeks ago. People loved it, absolutely loved it. And then we went through and we would have these periods of 10 to 15 minutes of silence after, just a very short reading and then silence. And then in the second section, people had a chance to walk the labyrinth or use finger labyrinths and just, a little bit more active kind of thing. And it was enjoyed so much that I've decided to put up the outline for this as a free download. Now, might go up today, might go up tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure at this point in time, but because the recognition that, as you say, people are weary. people are anxious. I know I'm anxious myself because next week I'm having surgery done. And, you know, it's a lot of things that many of us don't normally suffer from at this time in terms of the waiting. And so I think that one of the things that can really help us is extended quiet times, setting aside time, you know, hopefully each week. But with the last couple of weeks, you know, set aside time. And one of the things that we found on Saturday is that these kinds of things really work better in some ways if you can be together with other people. So if you can get even 2 to 3 other people together to do quiet days, or, you know, or something like that, or join Lily at Thin Place, because those kinds of things are really good kind of celebrations as well, that help us, you know, not to get rah, 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 but
Right.
to really kind of settle into the quiet that we need at this time so that we can have that radical preparation. And we will try, Lily, if you can put in the comments on the Facebook live, in the Facebook group, if you can put in the comments, you know, some of the things that you've mentioned, and
Okay.
I will put in the reference to the books as well, you know, this one and this one, as I said, and mine. The other one that I've got, which is also great, and Lily, of course, you're the one that led me to this, but to be honest, I haven't used it as much as these other two at this point, Honest Advent. And I know there are hundreds of Advent.
Well, that's the one Scott Erickson's is the one I'm using this year for the Honest Advent. And if you don't feel like getting the book, he's doing posts on Instagram as Scott the Painter. And that those pictures, in fact, yesterday, let me see if I can find, he posted about I posted something from his book on the incarnation, that incarnation is the process of becoming seen. To be seen is to allow yourself to be known. To be known is the risk of being loved. And that's, I think that in the fatigue and in the exhaustion and in the desire to be people of peace and justice, that we just need to know how beloved we are. And
yes.
that Jesus didn't come, you know, I always say one of the stations I do is Jesus comes to the mess and was born into the mess, that he wasn't born in the palace. He wasn't born in a sterile hospital. He was born into the mess of culture and into the mess of a family that wasn't perfect, and into the mess of community and into the mess of poverty. He wasn't rich. And that's how he enters now too, that he enters into whatever mess we feel like we're in. And that's a radical thing that we don't always remember, that he came as a baby, and not as, you know, not on a horse, or not as, you know, not as an adult, that God didn't intervene into our world that way, but he came as this infant to a teenage mom and a dad, and who didn't know what they were doing yet. So that gives me hope. That gives me hope this Advent, that I don't have to know what I'm doing yet. I don't have to, it can still be messy. It can still be undecorated.
It was their first kid.
Yeah,
would have been, hopefully, there would have been family around. But of course, and he wouldn't have been, you know, this quiet little baby. He would have, like any baby. I was reading something this morning that said he would have screamed when he had colic.
Right.
You know, he would have screamed when he wasn't being fed on time, you know, and maybe Mary had cracked nipples and it was painful for her to feed. And, you know, and all of the issues that new mothers have with trying to feed a baby, all of these things that she would have struggled with. And we forget that, you know, I mean, and part of what I've loved over the years in terms of the Advent story is making it more real, making it more, you know, like taking it away from those Christmas card photos and from the Hallmark movies and from the everything else, and making it real. And I think these things we're talking about are the things that make it real, and real for what it was back then, but real for what it is for us now as well. And I think that's part of what we need to grapple with as we kind of work on how we practice Advent. And who are we reading? What are we reading that prepares us for these things, for the reality, for this new reality, as John Vanderlaar said. This is so important for us. And talking about new realities, I think we're at the end of our time here, Lily. Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I am terrible at interrupting. I know that, so I apologize for that. I just want to mention that we're not going to do that. The next one we're going to do will be January 5th, which of course will be Epiphany. So we'll be talking about Epiphany and, you know, what it means. And of course, moving forward into the season of Epiphany, which is the season of getting out there. That's what Epiphany kind of, in a way, was meant to be all about.
Yeah, it was the light coming to everyone, to the Gentiles and to everyone. And I wanted to recommend your book that I'm a part of as well, because Lean Towards the Light has some great stuff in it if you haven't ordered that. And also you have a journal that just because it's already the 8th of December doesn't mean you can't start something. In fact, I've got 2 new Advent books coming in the mail today, hopefully, because that's why we get the 12 days of Christmas. You don't have to feel like it all has to be jammed into the next couple of weeks. It can go all the way to Epiphany. And then I do the season of Epiphany so that you get, you know, all of January can be the arrival of the Magi to visit Jesus, and you get to retell the story. And one of my friends said yesterday, I was complaining because my perfect world scenario, Christine, was to create a sacred space somewhere that wasn't in a church, but like a coffee shop or something like that. Because I haven't really done one in Nashville in a couple of years. And, but I never got around to like organizing that or advertising. And it's like the 8th of December. So she goes, well, Lil, you believe in Epiphany. What if you did it either the 12 days of Christmas or you made it in January? And I was like, I like that. Thank you for that reminder that we can keep the celebration and the waiting and then the celebration of Jesus's birth going. It doesn't have to end on the 25th.
Amen, amen, and amen. Amen. Blessed rest of Advent and Christmas to everybody that is watching this. And certainly to you, Lily, though we of course will be in communication, I'm sure, before Christmas. So
yep. And if I get a quiet day together, I'm thinking about that as a possibility, or a Blue Christmas on the 21st. That's our normal Tuesday night thin place. Someone asked me if I would do a Blue Christmas concept or a waiting. I'm thinking more about waiting and Blue Christmas combined, kind of a quiet that way. So I'll let you know if that materializes. We'll advertise it on God's Space and have it be open to anyone who wants to come. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. And blessings. And we will see you. All right. Happy Advent. Happy Merry Christmas. You too. All right. Take care.